John Jackman was a soldier who served with the 9th Kentucky Infantry in the Confederate Army. This is his journal. April 23rd, 1863. Broke up camp at Manchester and marched to Beech Grove, 12 miles toward Murfreesboro. Camped in a clover field. The hills about here remind me of Kentucky. They are covered with such pastures and beautiful groves of beech trees, which are now leaving out. Springtime is again coming over the hills with gaiety and song. The brigade is commanded temporarily by Colonel Hanson, General Helm being in command of ours and Brown's brigade. Beech Grove, in other days, had a country grocery and post office. There is a nice church, which is still used as a place of worship. April 25th. Moved camp 2 miles down the creek and pitched our tents on a ridge in a grove of beech trees. Beautiful prospect from camp. Can see for miles over gentle, undulating fields and green pastures on the one hand. On the other is stern mountain scenery. The yeomen are at work. The merry whistles, which the farmer boy sends up from the field, do not accord with our shrill fifes, neither do our occupations. This morning ordered to be ready to march at daylight tomorrow morning. April 26th. Last night the order to move was countermanded. Monotonous in camp. May 1st. Moved to Jacob's Store, 1.5 miles on the pike, south end Hoover's Gap. May 2nd. Our regiment thrown forward as advanced infantry and camped 1 mile in the gap. Our camp is in a pleasant place. On either side of the pike are hills mountain high. Our division is to defend this place. May 5th, climbed a high hill near camp and could see Murfreesboro 17 miles off. Also the smoke rising from the camps of the Army of the Cumberland about the place. Far beyond, could see the blue hills bordering the Cumberland River. I remained nearly all day, admiring the grand scenery about me. May 19th. Monotonous about camp until this morning when the regiment went 2 miles to the front on picket. I went to brigade headquarters with papers, and while there, witnessed a trial drill between the 6th Kentucky and 16th Louisiana Regiment, Adams' Brigade, which took place in a field close by. Looked like fair times. Carriages were drawn up all about the field, which had brought ladies to witness the grand military turnout. Generals Hardee, Breckinridge, Humphrey Marshall, Palmer, Brown, Adams, and Helm present. Palmer and Brown, judges. Both regiments drilled admirably. The judges decided in favor of the 6th Kentucky. All the regiments in Adams and Helm's brigades are to drill against each other, coming in according to the rank of colonels, commanding beginning at oldest. Then the judges will select the best drilled regiment in each brigade and let them have a trial drill. After this is over, a brigade drilling match will come off. The challenge came from General Adams. His brigade is in Breckinridge's division. May 20th. Witness the trial drill between the 13th Louisiana Regiment, their crack regiment, and 2nd Kentucky Regiment. Both regiments drilled splendidly. I believe the judges again decided in favor of the Kentuckians. The regiment came in off picket at 7 p.m. May 21st. Hard to decide which best drilling, the 4th Kentucky or the 19th Louisiana, that is, in my mind, but believe the judges decided in favor of the 4th. May 22nd. This was the day for our regiment to drill against the 32nd Alabama Regiment, Adams' Brigade. But the colonel of the Alabama Regiment being sick, the drill did not come off. While the boys were cooking dinner, the regiment ordered to the front immediately. A few minutes later the brigade passed, going to the front. All back by middle afternoon. False alarm. May 23rd. Order came after night to cook rations preparatory to a move the next morning. May 24th. Had reveille early, loaded baggage, and moved out. Very hot day, and we had to march 12 miles to Wartrace on the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad, where we arrived shortly after 12 p.m. and bivouacked near the town in a wood. All the boys suspected that the brigade was ordered to Mississippi and were grumbling a great deal, not liking to make another summer campaign in that state. Shortly after we stacked arms, General Breckinridge sent around an order for all the brigade to assemble at brigade headquarters at a given signal, that he wished to speak to the boys. Many said that if the brigade was ordered to reinforce Johnston, and if left with them to vote whether to stay or go, they would vote to stay in Tennessee. We fell in without arms, and the regiments were drawn up about the general. He got up on a stump and commenced by telling them that he had received orders from General Bragg to report at Wartrace with all of his division, save that portion composed of Tennessee troops, and hold himself in readiness to move on the cars. He said that he was not to receive further orders until he reached Atlanta, but that he had a pretty good idea where they were going, and that he supposed the boys could also guess at their destination. He said that knowing they would object to making a campaign in a climate so deleterious to health, especially in the summer season, he had, through General Hardee, sent a communication to General Bragg requesting that the Kentucky troops of his division be also permitted to remain with the Army of Tennessee, and Mississippi troops be given him instead, who would be glad to get back to their native state. He said that in reply to this communication, General Bragg left it to his, Breckinridge's, option whether the Kentucky troops would go or stay. This, he said, had left him in a dilemma, and that he intended to leave the question with them to decide. Bragg and Breckinridge had been at loggerheads since the Battle of Murfreesboro, and the boys felt that if they did not vote to follow their major general, outsiders would think that they also condemned him as well as Bragg. So when the vote was put, they not only held up their right hands to a man, but cheered loudly. The general then thanked them in a little but eloquent speech. He is the most eloquent speaker I ever heard. Bivouacked for the night where we first stopped, May 25th. At 6 p.m. all of our regiment got on the train, save 1 or 2 companies, on which the 6th Kentucky was stored. Colonel Caldwell and the colonel of the 6th had to take a car in partnership, and we were very much crowded. The train ran away with the engineer while coming down the mountain this side the tunnel. The grade is steep and 7 miles long, and we ran the 7 miles in 4 minutes and a half. I was sitting on a camp stool in the center of the car and could hardly keep my seat. The moon was just sinking behind the mountains, and as I watched it, as it were, skipping from crag to crag, I thought, "Farewell, old moon, I'll never see you again." We thought every moment the car would be dashed in pieces against the rocks, or be pitched off some of the cliffs and ground into dust. At last the train was stopped, and word came forward that the hindmost car, on which was Company C, had smashed up, or was missing at least. We all expected to find the last men killed or badly hurt, and our surgeons started back to find them. I went back also. The car flew to pieces just as the train was at the bottom of the grade. No 2 pieces of it were left together, but fortunately, though some of the boys were hurt, not a man was killed or a limb broken. One little fellow that was on top of the car was thrown clear over the telegraph wire into a bramble of briars, receiving no worse injury than being powerfully scratched. May 26th. Arrived at Chattanooga at 8 a.m. May 27th. Arrived at Atlanta 5 a.m. and left for West Point at 8 a.m. Arrived at West Point 6 p.m. May 28th. The regiment left at 10 a.m. on a train of flat cars. Dr. Byrne and I, with a barrel of whiskey in charge, left at 1 p.m. on the passenger train. Rain commenced pouring down about 11 a.m. and continued until next morning. Our train passed the regiment just before we got to Montgomery, and the boys looked like drowned rats. At the depot, the whiskey was issued out by buckets full. Though dark as pitch and raining, we had to move on board the R.B. Taney. I slept on a chair in the cabin the remainder of the night. May 29th. Left the Montgomery Wharf at daylight and arrived at Selma 5 p.m., immediately disembarked and moved our baggage to the railroad, and at 8 p.m. were whirled off towards Demopolis. A passenger car was attached to the train on which our regiment was being transported for General Helm and Colonel Caldwell. I quished myself on a cushioned seat and slept until we got to Demopolis at 2 a.m. I thus missed the good things the people had at the stations for the boys to eat. May 30th. Before daylight, commenced moving on board a small steamer on the Tombigbee River, and at sunrise we dropped down the river 3 miles, when we disembarked, again meeting with railroad connection. When the road is completed, a bridge will save all this trouble. At 11 a.m., the train moved off for Meridian, where we arrived at 5 p.m., laid over on a switch for daylight. May 31st. At 7 a.m., the train moved off for Jackson. In the evening, got off the train 6 miles from Jackson, the road having been torn up by the Federals that far out from the city, and went into camp. Suffered greatly for water. June 3rd. Moved camp near the city, in an old field east of town, on the margin of a small lake, and not very far from Pearl River. The sun had full play upon us, but this was more healthy than camping in the woods. In the evening, walked through the city, which presented quite a desolate appearance, a great deal of it having been lately burned down by General Grant's army. This improved the feelings of the inhabitants, though, towards the rebels, for now they bring water out on the streets for the soldiers marching through, when before they would refuse a rebel soldier a drink from their cisterns, or wells. Now commences a month of monotonous camp life. When we started for Mississippi, we thought we would jump off the cars and start immediately for the relief of Vicksburg. Our delay was caused by want of field transportation and artillery horses. Our division remained camped about Jackson, Loring's, Walker's, and French's about Canton. The weather kept very hot all the time. We had a good place to bathe in Pearl River. The boys caught a great many fish out of the lake and river. One way of catching them was rather novel. 2 men would go into the lake, when the water was not very deep, and hold a blanket spread out down close to the water. Then others would commence lashing the water about, making it muddy, and the fish would commence skipping above the surface of the lake and fall on the blanket, thus being caught by hundreds. I remained in camp all the time, seldom even going to the city. The cannonading was kept up steadily at Vicksburg, and the thunder of the guns could be easily heard at Jackson, a distance of 40 miles. Sometimes the firing would be kept up day and night. Other days would be perfectly quiet. June 7th. The regiment went out on the Clinton Road to do picket duty. June 9th. Was wakened up by the fire bells in the city, and on opening my eyes, saw that the light of a fire was shining into the office, the walls of the tent being up, making it light as day. Could see the Bowman House, a large hotel near the Capitol, wrapped in flames, which roared not a little in the stillness of the night. Heavy cannonading all night at Vicksburg. June 16th. The regiment went on picket to remain 48 hours, all quiet until 20th, when there was very heavy cannonading at Vicksburg. June 23rd. At night the cannon roared at Vicksburg and continued all day the 24th, the heaviest firing heard yet. June 28th. Attended the Baptist Church in Jackson, slim congregation. June 30th. Received marching orders. No cannonading since the 24th at Vicksburg. July 1st. Have marched today 14 miles, bivouacking 2 miles west of Clinton. The hottest march we have ever made. Many soldiers tumbled down in the road from sunstroke. Water was very scarce. I had nothing to carry, but in helping the other boys along, wore myself out. July 2nd, revel at 2 a.m. Had scarcely a wink of sleep last night. Dr. Byrne on a bender, and kept me awake by pulling my blankets and bothering me generally. Marched at 3 a.m. and arrived at Bolton Station, 9 miles, on the Vicksburg and Jackson Railroad, before the sun got hot. Bivouacked near the station. The boys had been getting green corn out of Jeff's fields, and this evening I went blackberry hunting on his plantation, Briar Field, I believe it is called. I know there were an abundance of briars and blackberries in some old fields that had been turned out. July 3rd. Light shower, some cannonading, the last guns fired at Vicksburg. The guns were heard quite plain, as we are only 15 miles from the place. July 4th. All quiet today. Received orders to be ready to move at a moment's notice. July 5th. At 4 p.m., moved out and marched 6 miles towards Vicksburg, moving on the railroad, which is the hardest marching. The evening, very hot. Division bivouacked in line of battle on the battlefield of Champion's Hill or Baker's Creek. All are expecting hot work tomorrow. We are close to the Big Black and have pontoons ready to put down. July 6th fell in early and low. Instead of marching towards Vicksburg, the head of the column turned back towards Jackson. We are confident Johnston received the intelligence of the fall of Vicksburg last night. A hot and dusty march of 10 miles brought us to Clinton. We are bivouacked near town by a good spring. Heavy rain in the evening. July 7th. Marched by the Raymond Road to Jackson and bivouacked 2 miles below the city on Pearl River. This march of 15 miles has been about as disagreeable as we generally have. Water very scarce on the road. I had to straggle a little today. July 8th. The news had not been positively known to the troops of the fall of Vicksburg until today. The news cast a gloom over most of the troops, but did not seem to affect the orphans much. July 9th. Before daylight news came in that the enemy was approaching and ordered to be ready to move. At daylight marched to the suburbs of the city, our division being on the left wing. The Kentucky Brigade rested on the river below the city, and Adams' brigade extended on the right around to the Clinton Road. As soon as our line was established, a party sent into the city to press Negroes to work on the fortifications and brought out quite a crowd to our regiment, among them a few dandy barbers who did not fancy wielding the pick and shoving the spade much, but they had to go to work. After completing our works, we lay around loose, waiting for the coming of events. Our line ran through a Dutchman's garden, and we took his grape arbor for headquarters. I had to write part of the day, making out field return, etc. July 10th. Early the enemy came in front, which was known by the popping of the sharpshooters. They did not come in front of our brigade, but in front of Adams on the right and Stovall in the center. Nothing further than sharpshooting with very little cannonading on the lines today. July 11th. In the morning, skirmishing all around the line, save in front of our brigade. Not much cannonading from either side. Early in the forenoon, Buford's Kentucky Brigade had a pretty lively little fight on the extreme right of the army. At noon, the brigade ordered across to the right to support Loring, an assault being expected on that part of the line. Our position was immediately in the rear of Colonel Withers' fine mansion, the rifle pits running through his yard. The old colonel, who was not in the service, had a musket on his shoulder, ready to defend, or help defend, the works in front of his house, his mansion being exposed to artillery fire. He had moved all of his furniture out of the house into the backyard. A rain coming up soon after we got there, myself with others, volunteered to help him get his furniture into the house again. He got all in at a back door, save a large mahogany bedstead which we had to carry to the front door, where the Federal sharpshooters had full view of us, and gave us several rounds, but fortunately no one was hurt. I mention this as it was the only adventure I had during the battle. Several of the brigade were wounded during the evening by sharpshooters. The enemy not assaulting, we returned to our old position late in the afternoon. The next day, Colonel Withers was killed, and when our army evacuated, his house was burned. July 12th. Early this morning, General Hovey's division charged in front of Stovall's and the right of our brigade. He was repulsed with heavy loss, mostly inflicted by Cobb's battery of our brigade and Slocum's Washington artillery of Adams' brigade. They came up square in front of these two batteries. We captured 3 stands of colors and about 100 prisoners that I saw. In the evening, our regiment and the 2nd moved to the rear of Cobb's and Slocum's batteries as a support. But late in the evening, our regiment came back to old position, leaving the 2nd. July 13th. Lying about all day idle, the enemy not being in our front. The city was subject to shelling at times during the day, and sharpshooting was kept up on both sides with vigor. July 14th. Truce from 12 until 2 p.m. to allow the burying of the dead in front of our works. The city shelled during the night. July 15th. Very quiet around the lines all day. Suppose that the enemy is waiting for the arrival of the ammunition train. July 16th. Heavy firing of small arms and cannon on the right about noon. Have not learned the cause. I can tell from the looks of affairs we are going to retreat soon. No doubt tonight. As yet, there have been no Federals in front of us. They are in front of the 6th on the right. July 17th. Last night, 16th, at 12 o'clock, fell in silently and moved through the city, across the pontoon bridge, over Pearl River, and marched out on the Brandon Road. We were the last troops to cross the river, and the brigade moved in such good order that it excited the admiration of the commanding general. It has covered so many retreats, the boys know just how such things have to be done. When daylight came, we were 4 miles from the city, marched 14 miles during the day, and bivouacked 2 miles east of Brandon. A very hot day and dusty marching. All of the troops having to move on the same road, we were delayed greatly. July 18th, fooling along in the rear of the wagon train all day. In the evening, the rain poured down in torrents. After dark, when we went into camp, or rather, when we stopped for the night, everything wet and disagreeable. I was too tired to go to the wagons for my blankets, and Colonel Wycliffe loaned me a blanket for the night. Have marched 16 miles today. We remained at this place 2 or 3 days, having to cook rations nearly every day. We were on Dead River, and a lifeless-looking place it is. July 21st. Marched 9 miles and bivouacked 4 miles east of Morton, a little town on the Southern Railroad. Looking like rain, we put up our fly, and just as we drove the last pin, a heavy storm of rain came pelting down. The companies have neither flies nor tents, and the boys have to weather the storm as best they can. They generally, though, stretch their blankets up in the manner of a dog tent, which shelters them very well from the inclement weather. Here we remained in camp, or bivouacked, a few days, the time passing monotonously. We had rain nearly every day. Water to drink was very scarce. The country perfectly level about camp and inclined to be swampy. July 26th. Orders to cook 4 days' rations preparatory, we think, to a march for Enterprise, Mississippi. July 27th. All quiet today. No prospect of a move soon. Everything seems to be at a standstill. We'll probably move camp, however, very soon. July 28th. Moved camp 4 miles, and yet in 4 miles of Morton. Our march was through pine woods and broken country. This concludes the 7th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.